What if everything you believed about the good life is actually upside down? In this episode, we're diving into the radical message of Jesus, one that flips our ideas of success, happiness, and strength completely on their heads. We are talking about two kingdoms, two perspectives, and one choice that changes everything. If you've ever felt like Christianity is just about rules or performance, this conversation might be the reset your soul needs. Let's explore what it really means to live your best life. Here on the Pastor's Potluck Podcast, our goal is to encourage you and maybe in the process, entertain you. If you're ready, let's dig in. Welcome to another episode of the Pastor's Potluck Podcast. I'm excited about today because we're starting a new topic. We are kind of setting this up just a little bit. Whenever I got hired in the middle of 2020, you were smack dab in the middle of this sermon series.
Yes.
And so a lot of the stuff that I watched online was, just seeing how, what did the worship team sound like? What was your preaching style? Just kind of getting a feel of the church culture as well. And we wrapped up our natural church development conversation, and we were trying to figure out like some things. And I just kind of tossed it out there. I was like, dude, we should do like one of your old sermon series. And we both landed on the idea of doing the upside down because, first off, it's been a while since you've had like some conversation, like lengthy conversations about this. I missed the first half of it. I should say, whenever I got hired on, I missed the rest of it because, you're in this honeymoon phase.
Yeah.
You're in a completely new area of the country.
Yep.
And so I'm excited about this and excited about our conversation, but we're going to be talking about your sermon series that you had called Upside Down. And what is the basis for this sermon or that sermon series that you had put together?
Yeah. So up until Rise and Fall, it was the longest sermon series I ever did. It wasn't supposed to be that long, but we launched it, and then we went into COVID. Like this was in March of 2020. And so I was only going to do a couple key passages working through the Sermon on the Mount, which is Matthew 5 through 7. But I was only going to go about 8 weeks because that was about the max of how long I would go in a series at that point.
Yeah.
But then when everything in the world shut down and I was preaching to an empty room for months and months and months, I was like, well, there's no real reason why we need to do anything different. We might as well just take our time and walk through the Sermon on the Mount. And so it ended up being 20 weeks long, I believe.
Yeah, and that sermon that title is like perfect for that time of the
it looked almost prophetic
history.
because the world was upside down. But the reason why it was called Upside Down is that like when it comes like Sermon on the Mount is not here's how to be a good boy or a good girl or whatever, how to be a moral person. That's not the purpose of the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount is Jesus teaching a kingdom ethic of when the Spirit is in charge and you're dependent upon God, this is the results of it. So I know that it's easy to kind of swap these ideas, but it's not this checklist of do this, do this, do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. That's not really the essence of the Sermon on the Mount. What you're seeing in this is God's ideal of what it will be like in his kingdom. And this should be the ethic of his kingdom. This is the leading and guiding principles in his kingdom. And so, and what we're going to see as we kind of dive, we're not going to do this for 20 weeks, don't worry.
It'll be 50.
Yeah, I'll do 75 weeks on the Sermon on the Mount.
We could do that here if we took it like scripture by scripture.
I could. No, but it's not going to be this like just a moral message. It is a kingdom message of it's these sorts of values within the kingdom that result in the kingdom growing and spreading and bringing new creation to bear on the old creation. So it's not like a checkbox morality, although it definitely will affect your morality and worldview when you understand what Jesus is talking about in the Sermon on the Mount. And so that's what upside down is, because upside down is the values of the kingdom are upside down to the rest of the world. I had a mentor one time tell me that he didn't like the terminology of the upside down kingdom, because he said God's kingdom's not actually upside down, it's right side up. The rest of the world is what's actually upside down, because God's kingdom is creation as it's meant to be. The rest of the world is actually what's upside down.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, I respect that, but given the fact that we live in the upside down world that you're referring to, and then that would make God's kingdom upside down, I'm just going to go with the title upside down, because the whole purpose is the kingdom values that we are going to talk about and the kingdom way of doing things, very countercultural for the first century, not the way that they would have done things or valued things or prized things in first century Judaism or in first century Palestine. Whether you were Jewish or Gentile, all of this stuff is going to be radical, like, whoa, this is more, this is further, this is a new ethic almost that is unfamiliar to us. And in 2025, this ethic is almost unheard of.
Yeah.
Even with 2 billion people, this is why I said 2 billion people around the world say that they're Christians, and there's no way that that's true. Because if you had 2 billion people living out Matthew 5-7, the world would be a drastically different place.
Yeah, the other 6 billion would be radically influenced, or their lives would be radically changed because of the generosity, because of the prayer, because of the
lack of hypocrites.
Yes.
Everything
would be drastically different.
So it's not this. The Sermon on the Mount is not checkbox Christianity of, okay, I got to do this, I got to do this.
Yeah.
It's more like, this is what happens when the Spirit gets in charge.
Yeah. Now, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
This is kind of getting deep, like right off the bat, but sometimes I think it's necessary. Why do you think it's easy for people to stay rooted in an earthly kingdom even after becoming believers?
I think if you remember what I talked about on Easter, I don't think people actually understand that Christianity has something to offer them right now. So you probably have two different camps of people. Like, you get one camp that they believe Christianity has something to offer them, but they only believe that it has to do with eternity. Then you get people that are like, I believe Christianity has something to offer me right now, but it's just a moralized message of like, stop drinking, stop smoking, stop cussing, stop doing this, stop doing this, stop doing this. And they're like, I'm not interested in that. And so I think that you deal with both of those people. So it's very easy to accept the salvation that God offers at the end of your life, while not realizing that actually puts a mandate on your current life to change. And if we actually, like, these are the words of Jesus, like he says, before you come and follow me, you need to count the cost. Like, nobody starts to build a tower and doesn't count the cost of what it's going to take to finish it. That's what's happening a lot of times, especially when you see these, like, maybe a service where, and I'm not saying anything against this, I've done this before, but like at the end of a service, you share the gospel and like, hey, I want you to raise your hand if you want to receive this for the first time. It's very easy to raise your hand. It's drastically different to allow raising your hand to change your whole life.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, most people didn't count the cost when they prayed the sinner's prayer or whatever it is that they did. They didn't realize, it's like, no, listen, when you pray this prayer, God is saving you. He's forgiving you. He's also taking over.
Yeah.
Like, that message is not always immediately clear, I don't think, because most of the time we get so focused on evangelism that we forget that the church is also called to discipleship.
Yeah.
So we're always trying to get people saved,
but we're not teaching them and leading them.
But like helping them understand, like, listen, you can't call yourself a Christian and continue to live like the world. And now, some of this is, there are theological distinctions that I do not hold that allow for people to say yes to Jesus and live however they want, which I think that's where the water got really muddy. When you tell people that they can say a prayer and that then they are eternally secure no matter what happens in their life, you set them up to reject the ethics and the standards of the kingdom that they've been called to.
Yeah.
because, well, now they've prayed a prayer, now they've checked a box, and then, I've told this story before. Someone stood in our church lobby and was like, we got to get young people saved. That way it doesn't matter what they do the rest of their life. And I go,
are you rejecting the life-changing power of the Holy Spirit that work in people's lives?
I'm like, that's spiritual manipulation. That's thinking that God has to save someone that prayed a half-hearted prayer, but it never changed their whole heart. Like that's spiritual manipulation. And that, again, I'm not trying to like hound people that believe in once saved, always saved or eternal security, because I think there's some healthy iterations of that. But
isn't there a parable about that? But with the seeds and it landing on, and sometimes it looks like it takes root, but it's easily trampled, and the birds come and get it here, and it doesn't land on good soil. Like Jesus talks about that.
Yeah, and of course, everyone with their own theological distinctions have different ways of interpreting the spiritual state of every one of those in the parable of the sower. But like my major point is like I'm not saying that there's not healthy iterations of the eternal security. And when I say healthy, I'm not saying that I agree with it. There's just people that would agree with me. They go, if your life isn't showing holiness, then you probably didn't mean what it was that you prayed. And I think that's a healthy version of it. This whole version, though, that says that you can be committed to Jesus and live like the rest of the world and still be saved because you prayed a prayer. That unhealthy version, I think, is what's responsible for a lot of this. And then I do think on some level, the seeker-sensitive church growth, church health movement of the last couple of decades, which was always more focused on how many butts we can get in seats rather than how many lives we can actually see changed, how many hands we can get raised, how many baptisms we can have, whether those people are ever experiencing true, genuine faith in Jesus that's transforming them. I think some of that is responsible for it as well, which has led people to think that they could come to church regularly, maybe serve on a team, give an offering here and there, consider themselves Christians, whether it ever changes their ethic or their worldview. Mm-hmm. And that's just it's not the case. Like, when you say yes to Jesus, your world gets flipped upside down. And you will now see things the way that Jesus sees them, or you really didn't pray that prayer that you think that you did. Like you don't get to disagree with Jesus and call him Lord at the same time. These are not options, but this is how people are trying to essentially live. And so that's why the upside down thing is like, we're gonna see, like, this is the way that the world thinks is appropriate, or this is the way that the world says this is how we do things. And Jesus is going to come along and not reiterate just the Jewish law. He's going to take the Jewish law and build off of it to an even new standard that does not, like, I think I've heard people where they try to talk about how, like, oh, well, Jesus came along and he only has 2 commands: love God, love people, so therefore we can get rid of everything else. And we go, I don't think that you're properly understanding that when Jesus preached Matthew 5-7, he never once lowered a standard.
Yeah.
He never once changed an ethic. That it wasn't like, oh, well, God used to be against this, but now Jesus is okay with this. No, he always took the standard not to just the external level, which is where a lot of Israel's laws landed. He would bring it to the internal. And that's what was going on. But for today, before we get into the teachings of the Sermon on the Mount, I'd messaged you yesterday. What I really want to do is help set up what's going on in Matthew's Gospel when the Sermon on the Mount actually begins.
Yes. So
that way we can see what the Sermon on the Mount was meant to be. Because if we miss this, what I'm getting ready to share with you, again, this is the way that you get to a moralized message of the Bible and a moralized message specifically of the Sermon on the Mount. Mm-hmm. Is if you're just reading the Gospels like they're stories about Jesus' life, and then here's his teaching, and here's his teaching, so this is a checklist of things to do and to not do, which is the way that probably most everyone reads the Bible. That's how you're coming up with this idea.
Yeah.
That's not really what's going on. The reason why I say there's something different going on here that we need to pay attention to has to do with the setup. How did we get where we got? And I've shared this with people all over, and I think I'll have to share it until I'm dead for maybe even one person to remember that I said it.
Yeah.
Because every time I say it, it feels like it goes in one ear and out the other. And that is, also, if you have skeptics in your life that like to attack the Bible, this might help a lot with them. Because a lot of them want to know, why do the Gospels, who tell the same story, why does it feel like sometimes they get stuff mixed up? Why does it feel like sometimes things are out of order? Why does it feel like sometimes stories are a little bit different?
Yeah.
And the average Christian doesn't have a good answer for those whatsoever.
Yeah.
Because we don't know this very basic thing that I'm getting ready to share, which is outside of Luke, and even to an extent Luke, but outside of Luke, for the most part, the Gospels were written for theological purposes and not for giving you a strict timeline of what was taking place. That's just not really how they wrote in the ancient world.
Yeah.
They would take a bunch of different stories and arrange them to tell a story, whether they happened in that order or not. And as far as the ancient Near Eastern and first century writings and all of this is concerned, that's not, it doesn't make something untrue. It meant that they were writing for a different purpose.
Yeah.
So Matthew is writing not chronologically. Luke wants to write chronologically. When you go to Luke chapter 1, this letter is written for Theophilus. I have sought to give you an orderly account of the things that took place.
Yeah.
He was out, Luke was out, interviewing eyewitnesses, gathering the stories, and he is trying to put it together chronologically. Matthew does not give that disclaimer whatsoever. Matthew, it becomes very obvious, is doing something different. And here's what Matthew is doing. It becomes really obvious in chapter 2 when you get this story of the wise men showing up in Jerusalem looking for the king that was just born, and Herod going, what are you talking about? I didn't just have no baby.
Yeah.
And again, this is the only gospel that shares this story. Why? Because they were writing theologically. So John tells us in his gospel, you could fill volumes with all the stories that they had about Jesus. They only chose certain ones, and the Holy Spirit only chose certain ones for these gospels because he was making theological points as much as he was historical points.
Yeah.
So because they were writing theologically does not mean that these are not historical things as well. I'm just saying the arrangement is theological. And so that's why Matthew, who got most of his information most likely from Mark, adds stories that he had heard from eyewitnesses about the early life of Jesus that the other Gospels don't have. One of which being the wise men coming from the east, showing up in Jerusalem. Where's the newborn king of the Jews? What are you talking about? Herod didn't just have a baby. So he brings the scribes and people in. He goes, where was this supposed to happen? They said it was supposed to happen in Bethlehem. So the wise men go off to Bethlehem. They find the Christ child there, and then God reveals to the wise men that Herod is getting ready to massacre every baby in Bethlehem 2 years old and younger, because by the time the wise men showed up, Jesus could have been anywhere from 6 months probably to 2 years old. And there's a little, I'm going to put you on the spot on the potluck to test Bible knowledge. If you get it wrong, it's okay, but I don't think you'll get it wrong. What happened next? After the wise men go a different direction, and then Joseph gets a vision that Herod is on the move, what happens next?
They go to Egypt.
They go to Egypt.
Yeah.
He's the only...
Points, baby!
Yeah, points for Jared. He's the only gospel writer that tells that story. He's the only one. Why does he tell that story? Well, Matthew tells on himself right afterwards that they head to Egypt, and he says it was to fulfill prophecy that out of Egypt will I call my son. Now, again, when people hear that, they go, oh, yeah. So that prophecy was about Jesus' family having to go to Egypt, and then he would call them out of there. And he goes, no, that's not what that prophecy is about. Even though that is the fulfillment of it, we have to, where did that originally come from? Who was that originally written about? Israel.
Yeah.
Israel in Egypt. So it becomes very obvious early in Matthew that Matthew is writing his gospel to set Jesus up as the new Israel. as Israel in person, as Israel in success in all the ways that they failed. It becomes very obvious because he's the only one that tells the story about Egypt. Why didn't Luke tell that? Why didn't John tell that? They had different purposes in their writing. So Matthew tells this story because he wants us to know that as we follow the story of Jesus, we are following a new version of the old story of Israel.
Yeah.
And what's going to happen is that Israel failed to be the son that God intended for it to be.
Yeah.
Right? When this is what most people don't realize whenever I try to tell them that Jesus was supposed to be taking Israel's place, is like Israel. In Exodus chapter 4, God sends Moses to tell Pharaoh to let his people go. He says, tell Pharaoh, Israel, the people in bondage and captivity, that's my firstborn son. And when Jesus shows up, he comes out of Egypt, which is what God did for Israel. And this is, don't worry, we're going to get the Sermon on the Mount. I just want to show you the underpinning of all this, the way you understand what's happening. So we get the Exodus story in Jesus' story where he has to go to Israel, or he has to go to Egypt.
Yeah.
Just like Israel had to go to Egypt. He is drawn out of Egypt just like Israel was drawn out of Egypt. That's in that's in Matthew chapter 2. The next thing that happens in Israel's story after the Exodus is what?
Crossing the Red Sea.
The Red Sea, absolutely. Matthew chapter 3. What's in Matthew chapter 3?
That eludes me. I'm sure it has something to do with the Red Sea.
It does. The very next thing is you see a forerunner that we learn about his birth in Luke's gospel named John the Baptist.
Yeah.
He's in the Jordan River baptizing people. Jesus comes up and is baptized because remember, the Red Sea is Israel's baptism. So after they come out of Egypt, they go through their baptism. When Jesus comes out of Egypt, again, many, many, many years later, but again, because Matthew is writing theologically, it doesn't matter that all of this time has passed.
Yeah.
The next thing that happens is Jesus is now being baptized, and then something miraculous happens. The heavens open, a dove descends, and the voice of God, John hears it.
Yeah.
This is my son, which is what he calls Israel, in whom I'm well pleased. So this is supposed to be Israel. Yes, this is supposed to be Israel. Because the very next thing in Israel's story, after they cross through the Red Sea, is they spend a season in the wilderness.
What does Jesus do?
Where they go through trials and testings, right? They don't have food. They don't have water. And everywhere that they turned, they failed. Yeah. Everywhere that they turned, they failed because they didn't want to trust God. They wanted to go back. They wanted to go back to the land that they were enslaved in because the wilderness was so difficult. They were in the wilderness how long, do you know?
40 years.
40 years. Matthew chapter 4, after his baptism, Jesus spends 40 days in the wilderness.
With trials and tribulations.
Where Satan comes to test him.
But is succeeding.
But he succeeds where Israel fails.
Yeah.
And again, it begins to be the story. We go, oh, Jesus is replaying all of this, and where they got it wrong, he's getting it right.
I wonder if there's like any kind of like visual representation of this somewhere to where like you can just like hang it up on a wall, something.
I haven't gone and found it yet, but a friend of mine told me I have to make sure I get this guy's name right. I think it's Peter Lightfoot. There is a scholar that has placed all of this together.
Yeah.
That you can go and find it. I only focus on the first couple of chapters to make the point normally, which is why we're doing it for the Sermon on the Mount.
But it solidifies the point if like the more that you see lined up, you're like, okay, I'm getting the picture now.
I want people to see this because what happens is it changes your whole view of the gospel.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden, Jesus doesn't just end up being some sinless guy at the end of the book that ends up on a cross to take the wrath of God.
Yeah.
Because that is for me, that is a version of Christianity that you can go, yeah, I believe that, and I believe that it'll save you. But I think it ties everything so much better together for you to see Jesus all throughout the Gospels as Israel's representative.
Yeah.
And what he's doing on that cross is covenant fulfillment so much more than it is just wrath.
Yeah.
Which gives us a different view of God. Because remember, all throughout the Old Testament, God is making this promise that he's going to do certain things. Like it starts all the way back with the story of Noah, where the rainbow, the word bow there is a war bow. It's not pointed at the earth after the flood. It's pointed at God, which was his promise. He would be the one that would ultimately pay the penalty for the sinfulness of humanity, and humanity, he wouldn't flood the earth again, meaning I'm not going to judge the earth. I'll be the one to take the punishment. He does the same thing in Genesis chapter 15 with the cleaving of the meats with Abraham. When he tells Abraham to go get all those animals, cut them open, there's a river of blood between them. What you would do to solidify covenant, you would walk on that river of blood, essentially. The blood would splash up, and what you were agreeing to is, if I don't hold up my end, what happened to these animals, it'll be my blood that's spilled.
Yeah.
But Abraham never walks the pieces. Remember, the flaming torch and the pot are what walks. That's symbolic. God says, don't worry. You guys are going to screw this up. In fact, he tells them when he's in the trance, your people are going to spend 400 years in captivity. Your people are going to screw this up. But don't worry. I'm going to take both ends of this covenant, and I'm going to see it all the way to fruition.
Yeah.
That's why when Jesus is showing us in Matthew that he is Israel, he's not simply some guy that got in the way of God's wrath so that you and I can go free. He was Israel on the cross, taking the punishment and fulfilling the covenant that brings about new creation and a new covenant, the covenant of grace, the one that's in his blood that saves us, not because we could follow the law, but because of what he has done. It's a different story than Jesus is some really good guy that they stuck up on a cross, and thankfully they beat him to death so way I can now go to heaven. That is when you see the beauty of the scriptures the way that they're meant to be, that almost feels like a silly story rather than covenant faithfulness. That God had said all the way back at the flood that this is what's going to happen, and then you see the fulfillment of this happen.
It's the culmination of so much. I mean, like, it's still, for me, it's like, it blows my mind because I'm still, like, as in the back of my mind, I'm playing out, okay, what happens after the wilderness? Then for Israel.
Matthew chapter 5.
Well, it's the Levitical law.
Yes.
That's what comes for Israel. So what does Jesus come next? What does he do next? Matthew chapter 5, which is this Sermon on the Mount, which is saying, hey, this is the law, but we're going to one-up it. We're going to give it a different standard. We're going to give it a God standard. We're going to give it a grace standard. It's a brand new standard of what didn't work in the past, which is good. We had some good morality that came out of it. We understood that we shouldn't kill. We don't look at another dude, but Jesus says, these things, and he goes, yeah, like, that's great, but even if I want to take it a little bit further, even if you look at this dude's wife and you're kind of like, wow, she's kind of good looking, then you've already committed adultery, even though you haven't done anything sexual. Like, Jesus begins to take this stuff and one up it. He goes, look, it's not so much about the action. It's more about what's in your heart.
Yeah.
It's more about, like, what you're processing in your mind. Like, what is, and we learned about this recently, if you are squozen, past tense, but if you are squeezed out, what is going to come out? And that's what Jesus is getting to the root of, is this stuff that is what's inside, what is taking over. It's not what other people are perceiving, because how many times have we seen people in our lifetime, and we hear it on the news, walk free whenever, without a shadow of doubt, probably they did what they did. Like, we see it on the news. We saw it with the O.J. Simpson case. Everybody in America was like, oh, they're locking that dude up. Yeah. But he got to walk free. Yeah. Because of what somebody perceived on the outside. But Jesus said, no. I could see what's on the inside. I can see what's on the inside. Yeah. I already know that you've already done this.
It's even more specific, too, like, when you start thinking about this, like, the issues that Israel had in the wilderness. Yeah. One of the first things that they didn't have was anything to eat. What does God send? Manna, which is
bread from heaven.
The very first thing Satan tempts Jesus with.
Bread.
Yeah. Turn these stones into bread.
Well, it's not just that. If you think about it, I mean, if you get into the minor details, then they are challenged with idols. Yeah. What does Satan tempt Jesus with? He says, look, I want you to bow to me. Yeah. Like, I mean, like, the more and more that I'm playing this out of my head, I'm going, holy cow.
So after the wilderness, they get to the mountain where they are now going to receive rescued people out of slavery are now going to receive a new kingdom. That's what Israel is setting up, a new kingdom with a new ethic that was specific to that kingdom.
Yeah.
So when Jesus gets in Matthew 5 out of the wilderness, he is saying, in my kingdom, here is the new ethic, which goes beyond the ethic of Israel, which only dealt with the external, and it's now going to deal with the internal.
Yeah.
And so you get that whole progression, and now all of a sudden we can see why the Sermon on the Mount is not simply a moral message of boxes for you to check, but rather becomes, this is what it's like to live in the kingdom. This is what it's like to participate in the kingdom. And inside the kingdom, everything's going to be different than it is outside of this kingdom. It's going to be a challenge to the kingdom of the world. The kingdom of heaven is going to challenge that, flip everything up on its head. Nothing will ever be the same as the result of what took place.
Yeah.
And again, watch this detail that I've missed for so long, and I'm just now starting to learn this stuff.
Yeah.
Luke chapter 6 is Luke's version of the Sermon on the Mount. But Luke 6 starts with Jesus going up on a mountain, and then he comes down the mountain, and it says he stood on a flat area and taught his disciples, and it goes into the Beatitudes.
Yeah.
So in Luke, he's not up on a mountain. In Matthew, he's up on a mountain. And then here's what the skeptic would do is go, whoa, wait a second. It looks like the Bible's contradicting itself.
Yeah.
That Luke says he's not on a mountain. Matthew says he is on a mountain. Here's probably what happened. And I never thought of this until recently, and this has blown my mind since I learned it. That there's a good chance that the Sermon on the Mount was Jesus' sermon, that everywhere he went, that's what he taught. I never even thought about this. Now, granted, he probably had all these teachings and sayings that were kind of his thing.
Yeah.
And it reminds me a lot, like if you invite me to come speak at your church, unless you give me a specific assignment, you're probably going to get my greatest hits.
Oh,
Period.
Yeah.
That's
you got,
like,
yeah, I remember the first time. I remember the first job I had in ministry. We had this guy coming through, and he came and preached just this lights out sermon.
Yeah.
And I was talking with him and the lead pastor of the church. I don't want to throw his name out there, but I kind of do, but I kind of don't. He ain't going to listen to this anyways. But he came in and preached, and I was just like, man, that was really good, man. That was fantastic. I never even heard a sermon like that, dude. Like, man, if people don't feel inspired to give, like after that, like I just don't know what it, just being young and just naive to the fact of like just some ministry. And the pastor pulled me out to the side and he goes, he's probably got about 4 or 5 sermons that he just rotates whenever he goes, because he's a fundraiser, like he's trying to raise money because he was a missionary.
Jesus would have been no different.
It's funny that you say that, but I'm like,
he probably taught this.
Yeah.
That's why some of the versions are even different. The Lord's Prayer, this is what I'm studying this week for Sunday. The Lord's Prayer is a little different in Luke's version of it than it is Matthew's. Does that mean that there's a contradiction in the scriptures? No. Luke is probably referencing this one time that he saw Jesus do this version of the Lord's Prayer. Matthew is referencing this one. My whole point in saying this is there's a good chance that Luke was correct, that he gave that same sermon at one point not on a mountain. But why did Jesus choose the mountain time as his depiction, or why did Matthew choose the mountain instance as his instance in Matthew? Because where Moses got the tablets was up on the mountain.
Yeah.
That's why Matthew has this version, which is probably true, actually definitely true.
Yeah.
And Luke's version is true also, that he wasn't on the mountain because it was probably a different instance.
Yeah.
either that or we just don't really know the geography, and maybe he was up on a mountain and then came down and was still actually technically on a mountain because there's a lot of mountains in that area. And so, like, either we don't know the geography, which is not a big deal, whether he was down a little ways in the mountain or he's up on the mountain. Matthew wants to make it clear, though, that what's happening is equal to Moses receiving from God the new ethic for Israel, which is also means for the Sermon on the Mount, this is once again God now giving an ethic, but it's not coming on tablets from someone else. It's coming from the one standing on the mountain, which now, like when people go, oh, Jesus never claimed to be God, I go, I think that it's pretty obvious when he stands and reinterprets Jewish law and says, you have heard it said, but I say unto you, he's standing in the place of God when he does that. Because on the mountain, Moses could only write down what God told him. On Matthew 5's mountain, Jesus gets to reinterpret the law because he is God. And so that's a drastically different, like almost deviation of the original story. We're not waiting on someone else to give us this. This is the one now. This is why the people are always so amazed. Where does he get this authority to do this? No one's allowed to take the Jewish law and make of it whatever they want. No one other than God is allowed to do that. And that's the whole point. Mm-hmm. It's like this one that has come, who is clearly Israel, like incarnate, is also a little bit more unique than just Israel's representative.
Yeah.
He's also he is that same God who said, when you fail, I'll be the one to pay the price. All the strands of Scripture start to weave together when we start to see it this way, and all of a sudden,
it's funny because it like until you see it, it just seems like everything's going apart.
Yeah, everything's going apart, and you got to find out which thread that you really want to follow, and like this is what I'm learning about the Bible in the last 5 years, is that the threads all weave together, and it's beautiful. It's so much more beautiful than even the gospel that I responded to in 2010.
Yeah.
It's so much. And like I was telling someone a couple of weeks ago, they were just struggling with some faith stuff, and I was like, literally, the more I get into this, you could not convince me differently because of what I'm finding in the Scriptures. And I go, it all comes together. It's all right there. And
it's one of those things too, like I just want to encourage people, just don't take our word for it. Like go read it and search it up and take notes. And like if you have a hard time seeing the connection between Israel and Jesus, then like go through Exodus, go through Matthew and see the parallels, because like, you know, growing up in the church, I've had the privilege to be able to hear both sides of the stories, but not have that puzzle piece that connects it.
Well, but let me give you another instance of how we have dumbed this down and simplified it.
Yeah.
Like if you would have asked me 8 years ago what it meant that they called Jesus the Son of God, I would have said, well, that means that he's God.
Yeah.
Can I just rationally tell you that when you tell me that Jesus is the Son of God and then try to convince me that he is co-equal with the Father, that sounds ridiculous to me?
Yeah.
Like, so when we give our Trinitarian theology, Father, Son, and Spirit, they're all equal, but this is the Son of God. It sounds like he's born from this God. This is how you get weird iterations of Christianity like Jehovah's Witness, Mormonism, and things like that, where it feels like Jesus is some subservient type God.
And I have a son. He ain't equal
He ain't
to me.
my equal. No. Son of God, probably more than saying that Jesus is divine, actually connects him to Israel. And it more, even in the first century context, what most people don't realize is that Caesar at that time in first century Rome was referred to as the Son of God. So the title Son of God ties Jesus to Israel. The title Son of God ties him to, sorry, Caesar, you're not the real king. I am the real king. Way more than it does his divinity. I think most people would be shocked at how it's there, but the point of the Gospels was never to prove that Jesus was God. That's probably a controversial statement for most people, because that's what we spend most of our time doing. It's trying to convince people that Jesus is God.
Yeah.
The gospel writers don't seem interested in making that point, even though they make that point all over the place in different ways. That's not the vast majority of their argument when it comes to Jesus. It's not, well, he's fully God, fully man. Because what we did is we took these stories and we tried to dumb them down into like creeds that we could pass along to people.
Yeah.
Rather than going, no, that's probably not their point that they're trying to make. So Son of Man or Son of God probably more ties him to Israel and ties him to the superior king over Caesar than talking about divinity. And again, it's just something that simple that we were told our whole life Son of God meant that Jesus was God.
Yeah.
And I go, well, if he's God, why is he Son seems lesser than Father when you say it like that?
Yeah, whenever you say 3 and 1, what is the 3 equal parts equaling 1?
And if this is confusing people, you're like, what are y'all talking about? I'm just saying Trinitarian theology of Father, Son, and Spirit being all equal.
Yeah.
There's a good chance that designation of him as the Son ties him to his role in the covenant as Israel way more than it ties to him to divinity.
Yeah.
This does not mean that Jesus is not God. Jesus is the second person in the Trinity, fully God, never ceased to not be God. He has always existed, always will be. I'm just saying when it comes to that title, I think it actually means something different than what we have come to believe that it means.
Yeah. Man, I'm excited for this.
Yeah, I am too. I got fired up. There's a little bit of fire hose moment.
Yeah. We're going to quench it right now with a mystery meat.
Yeah, you'll watch me get real quiet real quick.
Yeah. What's your best impersonation of a celebrity or cartoon character? Come on, hit us.
Best.
What's your best impersonation of a celebrity or cartoon character?
I don't do impersonations. Like you told me on Sunday, like, oh, you should do your best Australian accent. I'm like, I don't have one.
I didn't think that you were going to share with people that I said that. I just wanted you to do it.
Here, let me give you a little preaching. Here's a little preaching tip. I knew that you said what you needed to do is to cut the tension with an Australian accent. I said, I can actually cut the tension
without doing it
by telling people that you told me to do an Australian accent and admitting to not having one.
Yeah,
does the same thing as me making a fool of myself with my version of an Australian accent.
That's good. Touche.
I don't have I would not even know where to start. I'm the worst at mystery meat. We're going to have to go through that bucket and make sure that it's stuff that I can actually do.
I think it's different whenever like whenever we are impersonating a character that these celebrities are doing. Like I can't just go out and be Heath Ledger. It's easier for me to do an impersonation of Heath Ledger's Joker.
Now I do like doing some of the Joker stuff now that you mentioned that.
Yeah.
I love the scene when he's in the hospital and Two-Face is in the bed. He shows up in the nurse's costume and he just looks at him and he goes, hi.
Yeah.
That hi is so funny to me.
It's like I'm sorry, dude.
It's like, it wasn't, it was, I love that hi.
I know, it's so good.
That makes me laugh so much. And then when he's trying to blow the hospitals up and he's just trying to click and click and click.
I mean, because
that's probably my best one.
Yeah.
Hi.
Well, we do, like I said, I think we do more impersonations of the actual characters than the individual themselves.
Well,
because because how many times have we like quoted Dumb and Dumber the past month?
I just did it today. Anna said something about Diet Coke, and I was like, yeah,
big gulps,
huh? No, recently. Okay, this is not really a celebrity unless you're like a pastor nerd.
Yeah.
But for Good Friday, I told everyone I was using that clip from Alistair Begg, who is a Scottish preacher.
Yeah.
And so like I, used the Man on the Middle Cross.
Yeah.
I've been trying to talk like him
ever
since Easter week because his accent is so much fun to listen to. Like, all right, I love the clip of the Man on the Middle Cross.
Yeah.
but I may just like listening to Alistair Begg talk more. That might be why I watch that like 100 times every Easter.
So I'm the same thing. I'm the same thing with N.T. Wright.
Oh, yeah.
Because he had that big old long video series. And so whenever I get up in the morning, Erica, she says, hey, babe, can you turn on the coffee machine? I'm like, yep. And then in my head, I go, but first, some tea. I'm making myself some tea before I get this going.
Yeah, I don't.
Because like he said that at the beginning of like he's like, all right, so we're gonna break down this blah 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 scripture and this and this and that, and this is the theme of what we're talking about. But first, some tea.
Yeah, I love like we just listened to that podcast of John Tyson.
Oh yeah,
I love listening to Australian, Scottish, British accents. Like it would be so cool to have one of those. Or to even be able to mimic one of them, but I can't.
Yeah.
I can't.
You could change your Siri to be an Australian person.
What?
Yeah. Like whenever say if like you get invited to go speak somewhere and someone says, hey man, here's the address for the church, and you put it in your maps, it'll say it in an Australian accent. Turn left, turn right. Yeah, I'm.
How do I do this? I'm doing it right now.
Yeah, I'll show you.
That was worth the potluck, right there. If nothing I said up to this point has mattered to you, you can get accents on Siri.
Yeah, I'm dead serious.
Is it a dude?
You can make it a guy or a female.
Oh, what's his name? Does it cease to be Siri?
Yeah, I think they're all Siri.
All right, well. That's what I'll be doing as soon as we're done with this.
I mean, they don't rename him if he's a British guy like Roger. Hey, Roger, can you send Pastor Scott a text for me really quick? It's all Siri.
I would love if it was different names.
That would be weird.
Actually, if you could just access all of them simultaneously based on what name you say.
Yeah,
Like if you're just feeling a certain type of way and you're like, I need this sort of accent. You're like, all right, Betty, it's your turn. And then like,
hey Betty, I need a joke. I need to pick me up.
Oh yeah, I'm doing this immediately because I love. I wonder if they've got Scottish.
I don't know. Erica had it on like a Russian guy for a while.
I think Scottish accents are
my
favorite in the whole world.
Turn left.
I can do a little Russian. But I'm not going to.
It's a little Ruski.
Yeah, I can do it.
All right, y'all have a good weekend. Join us for another episode next week. I'm really excited about this conversation. I hope that you are as well. Share this with someone if you feel like they need it. Share it with them if you feel like they don't need it. I don't care.
Amen.
All righty. Let me see your phone. Thank you so much for listening in with us today. We really appreciate it. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You can also follow us on social media, on Facebook, Instagram. You can also watch the video version of this on YouTube as well. All you have to do is search up the Pastor's Potluck Podcast. From all of us here, we want to say thank you, and we'll see you next week.